This is the meaning of that almost insane happiness in the eyes of the medieval saint in the picture. This is the meaning of the sealed eyes of the superb Buddhist image. The Christian saint is happy because he has verily been cut off from the world. He is separate from things and is staring at them in astonishment. But why should the Buddhist saint be astonished at things, since there is really only one thing, and that being impersonal can hardly be astonished at itself? There have been many pantheist poems suggesting wonder, but no really successful ones. The pantheist cannot wonder, for he cannot praise God or praise anything as really distinct from himself. Our immediate business here, however, is with the effect of this Christian admiration, which strikes outwards towards a deity distinct from the worshipper, upon the general need for ethical activity and social reform. And surely its effect is sufficiently obvious. There is no real possibility of getting out of pantheism any special impulse to moral action, for pantheism implies in its nature that one thing is as good as another, whereas action implies in its nature that one thing is greatly preferable to another. Swinburne, in the high summer of his skepticism, tried in vain to wrestle with this difficulty. In Songs Before Sunrise, written under the inspiration of Garibaldi and the revolt of Italy, he proclaimed the newer religion and the purer God which should wither up all the priests of the world. What doest thou now, looking Godward to cry? I am I, thou art thou. I am low, thou art high. I am thou that thou seekest to find him. Find thou but thyself, thou art I. Of which the immediate and evident deduction is that tyrants are as much the sons of God as Garibaldis, and that King Bomba of Naples, having, with the utmost success, found himself, is identical with the ultimate good in all things. The truth is that the Western energy that dethrones tyrants has been directly due to the Western theology that says, I am I, thou art thou. The same spiritual separation which looked up and saw a good king in the universe, looked up and saw a bad king in Naples. The worshippers of Bomba's god dethroned Bomba. The worshippers of Swinburne's god have covered Asia for centuries and have never dethroned a tyrant. The Indian saint may reasonably shut his eyes because he is looking at that which is I and thou and we and they and it. It is a rational occupation, but it is not true in theory and not true in fact that it helps the Indian to keep an eye on Lord Curzon. That external vigilance which has always been the mark of Christianity, the command that we should watch and pray, has expressed itself both in typical Western orthodoxy and in typical Western politics, but both depend on the idea of a divinity transcendent, different from ourselves, a deity that disappears. Certainly the most sagacious creeds may suggest that we should pursue God into deeper and deeper rings of the labyrinth of our own ego, but only we of Christendom have said that we should hunt God like an eagle upon the mountains, and we have killed all monsters in the chase. Here again, therefore, we find that in so far as we value democracy and the self-renewing energies of the West, we are much more likely to find them in the old theology than the new. If we want reform, we must adhere to orthodoxy, especially in this matter. So much disputed in the councils of Mr. R.J. Campbell, the matter of insisting on the immanent or the transcendent deity. By insisting specially on the immanence of God, we get introspection, self-isolation, quietism, social indifference, Tibet. By insisting specially on the transcendence of God, we get wonder, curiosity, moral and political adventure, righteous indignation, Christendom. Insisting that God is inside man, man is always inside himself. By insisting that God transcends man, man has transcended himself. If we take any other doctrine that has been called old-fashioned, we shall find the case the same. It is the same, for instance, in the deep matter of the Trinity. Unitarians, a sect never to be mentioned without a special regard for their distinguished intellectual dignity and high intellectual honor, are often reformers by the accident that throws so many small sects into such an attitude. But there is nothing in the least liberal or akin to reform in the substitution of pure monotheism for the Trinity. The complex God of the Athanasian Creed may be an enigma for the intellect, but he is far less likely to gather the mystery and cruelty of a sultan than the lonely God of Omar or Mahomet. The God who is a mere awful unity is not only a king, but an Eastern king. The heart of humanity, especially of European humanity, is certainly much more satisfied by the strange hints and symbols that gather round the Trinitarian idea, the image of a council at which mercy pleads as well as justice, the conception of a sort of liberty and variety existing even in the inmost chamber of the world. For Western religion has always felt keenly the idea, it is not well for man to be alone. The social instinct asserted itself everywhere, as when the Eastern idea of hermits was practically expelled by the Western idea of monks. So even asceticism became brotherly, and the Trappists were sociable even when they were silent. If this love of a living complexity be our test, it is certainly healthier to have the Trinitarian religion than the Unitarian. For to us Trinitarians, if I may say it with reverence, to us God himself is a society. It is indeed a fathomless mystery of theology, and even if I were theologian enough to deal with it directly, it would not be relevant to do so here. Suffice it to say here that this triple enigma is as comforting as wine and open as an English fireside, that this thing that bewilders the intellect utterly quiets the heart. But out of the desert, from the dry places and the dreadful suns, come the cruel children of the lonely God, the Unitarians who, with scimitar in hand, have laid waste the world. For it is not well for God to be alone. Again, the same is true of that difficult matter of the danger of the soul, which has unsettled so many just minds. To hope for all souls is imperative, and it is quite tenable that their salvation is inevitable. It is tenable, but is not specially favorable to activity or progress. Our fighting and creative society ought rather to insist on the danger of everybody, on the fact that every man is hanging by a thread or clinging to a precipice. To say that all will be well anyhow is a comprehensible remark, but it cannot be called the blast of a trumpet. Europe ought rather to emphasize possible perdition, and Europe always has emphasized it. Here its highest religion is at one with all its cheapest romances. To the Buddhist or the Eastern fatalist, existence is a science or a plan, which must end up in a certain way. But to a Christian, existence is a story which may end up in any way. In a thrilling novel, that purely Christian product, the hero is not eaten by cannibals, but it is essential to the existence of the thrill that he might be eaten by cannibals. The hero must, so to speak, be an eatable hero. So in Christian morals, in short, it is wicked to call a man damned, but it is strictly religious and philosophic to call him damnable. All Christianity concentrates on the man at the crossroads. The vast and shallow philosophies, the huge synthesis of humbug, all talk about ages and evolution and ultimate developments. The true philosophy is concerned with the instants. Will a man take this road or that? That is the only thing to think about if you enjoy thinking. The eons are easy to think about. Anyone can think about them. The instant is really awful, and it is because our religion has intensely felt the instant that it has in literature dealt much with battle, and in theology dealt much with hell. It is full of danger, like a boy's book. It is at an immortal crisis. There is a great deal of real similarity between popular fiction and the religion of the Western people. If you say that popular fiction is vulgar and tawdry, you only say what the dreary and well-informed say about the images in the Catholic churches. Life, according to the faith, is very like a serial story in a magazine. Life ends with a promise or menace to be continued in our next. Also with a noble vulgarity, life imitates the serial and leaves off at the exciting moment. For death is distinctly an exciting moment. But the point is that a story is exciting because it has in it so strong an element of will, of what theology calls free will. You cannot finish a sum how you like, but you can finish a story how you like. When somebody discovered the differential calculus, there was only one differential calculus he could discover. But when Shakespeare killed Romeo, he might have married him to Juliet's old nurse if he had felt inclined. And Christendom has excelled in this narrative romance exactly because it has insisted on the theological free will. It is a large matter and too much to one side of the road to be discussed adequately here, but this is the real objection to that torrent of modern thought about treating crime as a disease, about making a prison merely a hygienic environment like a hospital, of healing sin by slow scientific methods. The fallacy of the whole thing is that evil is a matter of active choice, whereas disease is not. If you say that you are going to cure a profligate as you cure an asthmatic, my cheap and obvious answer is, produce the people who want to be asthmatics as many people want to be profligates. A man may lie still and be cured of a malady, but he must not lie still if he wants to be cured of a sin. On the contrary, he must get up and jump about violently. The whole point, indeed, is perfectly expressed in the very word which we use for a man in hospital. Patient is in the passive mood. Sinner is in the active. If a man is to be saved from influenza, he may be a patient, but if he is to be saved from forging, he must be not a patient, but an impatient. He must be personally impatient with forgery. All moral reform must start in the active, not the passive will. Here again we reach the same substantial conclusion. Insofar as we desire the definite reconstruction and the dangerous revolutions which have distinguished European civilization, we shall not discourage the thought of possible ruin, we shall rather encourage it. If we want, like the Eastern saints, merely to contemplate how right things are, of course we shall only say that they must go right. But if we particularly want to make them go right, we must insist that they may go wrong. Lastly, this truth is yet again true in the case of the common modern attempts to diminish or to explain away the divinity of Christ. The thing may be true or not. That I shall deal with before I end. But if the divinity is true, it is certainly terribly revolutionary. That a good man may have his back to the wall is no more than we knew already, but that God could have his back to the wall is a boast for all insurgents forever. Christianity is the only religion on earth that has felt that omnipotence made God incomplete. Christianity alone has felt that God, to be holy God, must have been a rebel as well as a king. Alone of all creeds, Christianity has added courage to the virtues of the Creator. For the only courage worth calling courage must necessarily mean that the soul passes a breaking point and does not break. In this indeed I approach a matter more dark and awful than it is easy to discuss, and I apologize in advance if any of my phrases fall wrong or seem irreverent touching a matter which the greatest saints and thinkers have justly feared to approach. But in that terrific tale of the Passion, there is a distinct emotional suggestion that the author of all things, in some unthinkable way, went not only through agony, but through doubt. It is written, "Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God." No, but the Lord thy God may tempt himself, and it seems as if this was what happened in Gethsemane. In a garden, Satan tempted man, and in a garden, God tempted God. He passed in some superhuman manner through our human horror of pessimism. When the world shook and the sun was wiped out of heaven, it was not at the crucifixion, but at the cry from the cross, the cry which confessed that God was forsaken of God. And now let the revolutionists choose a creed from all the creeds and a God from all the gods of the world, carefully weighing all the gods of inevitable recurrence and of unalterable power. They will not find another God who has himself been in revolt. Nay, the matter grows too difficult for human speech, but let the atheists themselves choose a God. They will find only one divinity who ever uttered their isolation, only one religion in which God seemed for an instant to be an atheist. These can be called the essentials of the old orthodoxy, of which the chief merit is that it is the natural fountain of revolution and reform, and of which the chief defect is that it is obviously only an abstract assertion. Its main advantage is that it is the most adventurous and manly of all theologies. Its chief disadvantage is simply that it is a theology. It can always be urged against it that it is in its nature arbitrary and in the air. But it is not so high in the air but that great archers spend their whole lives in shooting arrows at it. Yes, and their last arrows. There are men who will ruin themselves and ruin their civilization if they may ruin also this old fantastic tale. This is the last and most astounding fact about this faith, that its enemies will use any weapon against it, the swords that cut their own fingers, and the firebrands that burn their own homes. Men who begin to fight the Church for the sake of freedom and humanity end by flinging away freedom and humanity, if only they may fight the Church. This is no exaggeration. I could fill a book with the instances of it. Mr. Blatchford set out as an ordinary Bible smasher to prove that Adam was guiltless of sin against God. In maneuvering so as to maintain this, he admitted as a mere side issue that all the tyrants, from Nero to King Leopold, were guiltless of any sin against humanity. I know a man who has such a passion for proving that he will have no personal existence after death, that he falls back on the position that he has no personal existence now. He invokes Buddhism and says that all souls fade into each other. In order to prove that he cannot go to heaven, he proves that he cannot go to Hartlepool. I have known people who protested against religious education with arguments against any education, saying that the child's mind must grow freely, or that the old must not teach the young. I have known people who showed that there could be no divine judgment by showing that there can be no human judgment, even for practical purposes. They burned their own corn to set fire to the church. They smashed their own tools to smash it. Any stick was good enough to beat it with, though it were the last stick of their own dismembered furniture. We do not admire, we hardly excuse, the fanatic who wrecks this world for love of the other. But what are we to say of the fanatic who wrecks this world out of hatred of the other? He sacrifices the very existence of humanity to the non-existence of God. He offers his victims not to the altar, but merely to assert the idleness of the altar and the emptiness of the throne. He is ready to ruin even that primary ethic by which all things live, for his strange and eternal vengeance upon someone who never lived at all. And yet the thing hangs in the heavens unhurt. Its opponents only succeed in destroying all that they themselves justly hold dear. They do not destroy orthodoxy, they only destroy political and common courage sense. They do not prove that Adam was not responsible to God. How could they prove it? They only prove, from their premises, that the Tsar is not responsible to Russia. They do not prove that Adam should not have been punished by God. They only prove that the nearest sweater should not be punished by men. With their oriental doubts about personality, they do not make certain that we shall have no personal life hereafter. They only make certain that we shall not have a very jolly or complete one here. With their paralyzing hints of all conclusions coming out wrong, they do not tear the book of the recording angel. They only make it a little harder to keep the books of Marshall and Snellgrove. Not only is the faith the mother of all worldly energies, but its foes are the fathers of all worldly confusion. The secularists have not wrecked divine things, but the secularists have wrecked secular things, if that is any comfort to them. The Titans did not scale heaven, but they laid waste the world.